Hello, everyone. Welcome to Anime Dreams. Today, we're diving into another exciting fanfic discussion. Our topic is, what if female Naruto was in a dilemma? Part 3. Disclaimer. This content is purely for entertainment and discussion purposes. I do not own any of the anime footage or characters featured in this video. All rights and credits go to their respective creators and copyright holders. Let's jump right into it. 4 days later. Tell me about your crush. Shoto glanced away from his dessert, shifting his attention to Naruto. They had taken a break from studying, prompted by her complaints that focusing for 3 consecutive hours was impossible. While the need for a break was reasonable, her question left him unsettled. It wasn't like her to bring up something that might dampen the mood. Despite the cheerful smile on her face, Shoto could detect the subtle cracks in her composure. The slight quiver of her lip betrayed her unease, and her tone, typically bright and carefree, felt strained. It was unlike Naruto to wear a mask, especially in front of him. Her inquiry made him wonder. Why was she asking this now? More importantly, didn't she realize how obvious it was that he liked her? For days, Shoto had dropped hints. He had complimented her during quiet moments, remembered her favorite drink at this cafe, iced chocolate, though only because they didn't serve orange smoothies, and leaned closer to her during conversations. Every gesture, every touch, was deliberate. Could she truly believe he might like someone else? His sister's words echoed in his mind, bringing him back to the present. Shoto's mismatched eyes settled on Naruto's face, lingering on her forced smile. He didn't want to see her pretend. It was difficult enough watching her mask her emotions around others in their class. Taking a deep breath, he finally spoke. Why are you asking me about her? His voice was calm, though it carried the weight of his thoughts. Shoto studied Naruto carefully, searching for the meaning behind her words. Hoping, perhaps foolishly, that she might feel the same way. Her sudden nickname for him, homeostasis, had sparked a flicker of hope, but he didn't want to assume too much. She had kissed him once. A spontaneous, impulsive act after he admitted he didn't want her to get hurt. While the kiss had shocked him, he understood her reasoning. Naruto had a tendency to act on impulse, and her boldness at the sports festival was proof of that. Still, Shoto couldn't help but wish she'd act on impulse again, to voice what she truly felt instead of hiding behind an uneasy smile. I'm just curious, homeostasis. Naruto replied, her voice falsely cheerful. Her blue eyes avoided his gaze, betraying her attempt to maintain a facade. Shoto thinned his lips, momentarily glancing at her trembling smile. Usually, he imagined what it would be like to kiss her, but now all he could think about was how her tone exposed her real feelings. He hesitated, looking down at his hands before finally meeting her gaze. Patience was his default approach, but it was running thin. He couldn't stand this invisible wall between them anymore. Shoto gently tilted her chin up, meeting her reluctant gaze. A pang of guilt surged through him, knowing she didn't want to look at him. Still, if he couldn't see her eyes, he couldn't understand her. And out of everyone, Naruto's emotions were the ones he cared to decipher the most. Why are you asking something that makes you unhappy? His voice remained calm, though a storm of frustration brewed beneath the surface. I know you don't like that I have feelings for someone. The words hung between them like a weight. He saw Naruto's eyes widen in surprise, a flicker of pain reflecting in their depths. Guilt gnawed at him for voicing it aloud, but he needed her to drop the act. He wanted her to smile like she had at the amusement park, genuine and radiant. Memories of that day flashed through his mind. Her laughter, her excitement as she tugged him toward another ride. It had been one of his happiest days. The other was when she kissed him. What would have happened if he'd kissed her back? Shoto's gaze drifted to her lips before he quickly looked away. Now wasn't the time to dwell on hypotheticals. Still, his thoughts were interrupted when he noticed her staring at his lips, her blue eyes darkening with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He cleared his throat, and she quickly averted her gaze, embarrassment flooding her features. Her irritation seemed directed at herself rather than at him, a rare occurrence, given Naruto's tendency to express her feelings without hesitation. "I'm happy for you," she finally said, a weak smile curving her lips. It was a lie. Shoto knew it immediately. Her real smiles were small but sincere, lighting up her face in a way that made his heart flutter. This one didn't hold that warmth. He glanced around the cafe, his irritation growing when he noticed other customers staring at her. Their gazes lingered on her figure, and the realization made his jaw tighten. The urge to glare at them, or better yet, freeze them in place, was overwhelming. But for now, he focused on the girl in front of him, the one whose happiness mattered more than anything. "Don't lie to me, Naruto?" His words lingered in the air, soft yet firm, as he kept his irritation in check. It wasn't her fault she looked stunning in a dress. The blame lay squarely with those boys who failed to keep their gazes on her face, oblivious to the fact that she was with him. Her blue eyes wavered, reflecting uncertainty as though debating whether to admit the truth. Shoto inhaled deeply and leaned closer, hoping that proximity would encourage her honesty. Yet, the closer he got, the more details he noticed. Her lower lip was slightly fuller than the upper, and her eyes sparkled like precious gems. The whisker-like marks on her cheeks seemed smooth, inviting curiosity. He also caught how her gaze flitted briefly to his lips. Was she considering a kiss, or was he simply projecting his own hopes? Shoto couldn't deny the depth of his feelings for Naruto. "I'm not lying," she declared, her voice faltering despite the defiance in her eyes. That fiery determination was something he recognized. It was the same look she had given Endeavor when standing her ground. He admired that strength. But now, as her lips quivered slightly, he found himself captivated once more. "You're a terrible liar," he said simply. The words hung between them, and Shoto's gaze flickered downward to her lips before he forced himself to refocus on her brilliant blue eyes. But there was something magnetic about her lips that kept pulling his attention. When she cleared her throat, his cheeks flushed as he realized she'd caught him staring. Naruto's own cheeks were tinged with pink as her eyes locked onto his, curiosity mingling with an emotion that sent his heart racing. He looked away, pretending to focus on their forgotten textbooks, though he couldn't shake the tension lingering between them. "I don't like the idea that you have a crush on someone I don't know," she murmured, hunching her shoulders. Her voice carried sincerity, but frustration too. He could tell she felt guilty about admitting it because she refused to meet his gaze. Still, her honesty was a step forward, even if it left him feeling unsure. "You know that person," Shoto replied, his voice steady. Her eyes widened, and he could almost see her mind racing. Would she figure it out? He felt his pulse quicken as she began listing names. Ashido? Yaoyorozu? Tsuyu? Uraka? Hagakure? Jiru? Itsuka? He shook his head with every name, his patience tested as she failed to connect the dots. The more she guessed, the deeper the crease between her brows became. It amused him, but it also made him wonder why she couldn't see the obvious. "It's you, Naruto? I like you." He sighed as she continued to miss the point. How could she not notice the way he looked at her? Or the way he gravitated toward her, even when he tried to keep his feelings hidden? With her, everything felt natural. She grounded him in ways no one else could. He blinked, surprised when Naruto fell silent. Her cheeks were flushed, her gaze averted, and her body language radiated unease. Concerned, he reached out instinctively to check her forehead, but she stopped him by grabbing his hand. A jolt of something electric ran through him. Her trembling hand held his, but she refused to meet his eyes. Instead, she focused on their open books. "Naruto?" Shoto's voice softened as his mismatched eyes locked onto her. He wanted to ask if she was all right, but her pleading expression held him back. He glanced around the cozy cafe, noting the serene atmosphere. Perhaps now wasn't the time to press her. We should focus on studying for the exams," she stammered. Though reluctant, he nodded in agreement. "How was your study session with Todoroki?" Naruto suppressed the startled sound that threatened to escape her lips, glancing up to find Jiraiya watching her with a concerned expression. The two of them were having dinner, and until now, the atmosphere had been pleasantly serene. It was the kind of quiet that gave her space to reflect on her thoughts and emotions about her recent interaction with Shoto. "It's obvious that I like you." Shoto's deep voice echoed in her mind, a reminder of how oblivious she had been to his feelings. Feelings he had been expressing all along. Naruto's gaze dropped to her plate of steamed rice. Those fleeting touches, lingering stares, and thoughtful compliments were not just acts of kindness, they had been his way of conveying something deeper. Shoto's words were his clumsy attempt at expressing his feelings for her, though she wasn't sure whether to groan or blush at the realization. The fact that he liked her sent a thrill through her, even if she couldn't entirely comprehend why. It was as if her heart was racing like a car in a Formula One competition. At the same time, she felt the urge to groan because Shoto seemed completely oblivious to the weight of his words. She wanted to reprimand him for his cluelessness. After all, not everyone would naturally assume that they were the subject of such a confession. But then again, this was Shoto, and he could be remarkably dense at times. I misunderstood Shoto," Naruto admitted, her voice faltering. She tried to sound calm and collected but couldn't ignore the memory of his intense gaze, filled with frustration and emotion, making her feel restless. His words had left her heart fluttering uncontrollably, and she finally understood why he had seemed so irritated when she speculated about other girls. If the roles were reversed, she doubted she would have been able to maintain her composure. Jiraiya set down his chopsticks, his sharp black eyes studying her carefully. His expression was a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and alarm as he asked, "What do you mean by misunderstanding him?" Naruto hesitated. Discussing her feelings for a boy with her mentor felt awkward and deeply personal. She also had a sinking suspicion that Jiraiya might try to meddle in her relationship with Shoto. Not that there was a relationship, yet. A fleeting, mortifying image popped into her mind, making her stifle a squeak. Nothing was going to happen between her and Shoto until she figured out how to address the topic. It wasn't something she could ignore forever, but she also didn't know where to begin. Maybe I should focus on exams first. After that, then I can think about it. Shoto told me he likes me, she finally blurted, her cheeks turning a brilliant shade of red. Her heart pounded against her chest like a boxer delivering rapid punches, and a strange sense of both elation and uncertainty coursed through her. Was this what happiness felt like? She wasn't sure anymore. She glanced at her mentor. Jiraiya blinked repeatedly, as if trying to process her words. The silence stretched, and Naruto began to wonder if she had said too much. Despite their past conversations about her emotions, this felt different, more serious. "How does that make you feel?" Jiraiya asked at last. Naruto wanted to say it made her happy, but something held her back. She stared at her food, sorting through her conflicting emotions. It wasn't just happiness she felt, there was also a twinge of irritation. If Shoto truly liked her, why hadn't he been clearer? Why did he leave her to guess? Would I have been okay if he kissed me? She wondered. The thought made her pause. She remembered their accidental kiss before. He had frozen in shock, but she hadn't exactly hated it. "It makes me happy," she admitted, "but I wish he was more aware when he said it out loud." Jiraiya looked torn between laughing and groaning, which only annoyed her further. If anyone has the right to complain, it's me, she thought. "Are you willing to admit you have feelings for him now?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. Naruto fiddled with her food, her thoughts spinning. Her heart had fluttered when Shoto confessed, and she couldn't deny the jealousy she'd felt at the thought of him liking someone else. It was an emotion she had rarely experienced before, ugly and unwelcome. Finally, she exhaled and said, "I have feelings for him. But is it okay for me to date him?" Jiraiya's eyes widened, and he choked on his food. Naruto waited patiently, her brow raised, as he recovered. "I mean," she continued, "we'll have to return to Konoha after I graduate from UA." Jiraiya's serious expression took her by surprise. She had expected resistance, given the dangers that love posed for someone like her, a Jinchuriki. Her mother's fate was a sobering reminder. Yet, Kenji had assured her that things could be different for her. The Uzumaki clan would support her if she chose to have a family someday. But do I even want children? She wondered, shaking her head. She was only 15, those decisions were far in the future. That's not the point, she reminded herself. Jiraiya finally broke the silence. Do you really think a relationship with him could last that long? Naruto tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, meeting his gaze. His question gave her pause, not because she doubted Shouto's feelings, but because she knew how uncertain the future could be. Still, she didn't want to rush into anything or risk making a mistake. I don't know, she admitted. But I think it's worth figuring out. I'm not sure, Naruto finally admitted, her voice soft yet thoughtful. But I think it could last that long. Jiraiya sighed, his gaze drifting to the ceiling as if the answers he sought might be written there. The dramatic gesture earned a quirked eyebrow from Naruto, who suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. For someone who was her mentor, he certainly had a flair for theatrics. This kind of behavior was something she'd expect from an eccentric relative, not the seasoned toad sage tasked with guiding her. If it lasts that long, then you can deal with it when the time comes, Jiraiya eventually replied, his tone nonchalant. Not everyone ends up with their first love, you know. Naruto nodded, a small, wistful smile curling her lips. But wouldn't it be nice if they did? She murmured, her eyes shifting to the sketch of her parents displayed on the mantel. Her chest tightened, and she drew in a steadying breath. I heard from Akira that my mom married her first love, even though she wasn't sure about it at first. Jiraiya didn't respond immediately, and the lack of surprise in his expression made Naruto pause. Was there something he wasn't telling her? She narrowed her eyes slightly, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. This wasn't the time for such questions, her exams were just around the corner, and she couldn't afford to be distracted. Did anything else happen besides Todoroki's accidental confession? Jiraiya asked, his voice casual, though he avoided meeting her eyes. Naruto hesitated, her suspicions growing. There was definitely something he was keeping from her, but for now, she chose to let it go. Her exams took priority. She drew a deep breath and refocused, searching her memory for anything else worth mentioning. Actually, she said, her brow furrowing, I think I've been seeing my classmate's mom watching me again. The words lingered in the air, and Jiraiya's expression shifted, his black eyes narrowing with unease. Naruto immediately regretted bringing it up, but what else was there to talk about? She wasn't about to confront him about his secrets, not with so much on her plate already. Again? Jiraiya prompted, his tone sharper now. Naruto shrugged. Yeah. Every time Shouto and I take a break, I catch her looking at me. She always has this, sad expression, like I remind her of something painful. Or someone. Jiraiya froze. The reaction wasn't subtle, and Naruto noticed his tense posture immediately. Her lips thinned as unease crept into her mind. Was this somehow connected to whatever he wasn't telling her? She wanted to ask, but the words seemed stuck in her throat, just as they always were whenever her father came to mind. Which classmate? Jiraiya asked, his tone measured. Bakugo, Naruto replied simply. His gaze flickered briefly to the sketch of her parents before settling on a photograph of her with the Hokage. Naruto's stomach churned as a troubling thought surfaced. Could Jiraiya have known her parents? If he did, why would he keep it a secret? But secrets weren't new to her. People had hidden truths from her before. Naruto, Jiraiya said abruptly, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. I'll be away for the next few weeks. There's some research I need to take care of. Naruto's head snapped up, her blue eyes meeting his serious gaze. His attention lingered on the sketch of her parents, and an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. Something about this research felt significant, life-changing, even. She wasn't sure whether it would be for better or worse. Could it be possible for Minato Niazan to have a child? This thought had been occupying Mitsuki's mind ever since she noticed the striking resemblance between her son's classmate and her older brother. The question had lingered from the moment she first saw the blonde-haired girl at the bookstore cafe. Until that moment, Mitsuki had always believed Katsuki inherited traits that slightly resembled Minato. However, this girl had an uncanny similarity to him, the same golden hair and striking blue eyes that mirrored those of Minato and their mother. If not for her softer, rounder facial features, Uzumaki Naruto could almost be mistaken for a younger, female version of her brother. Even her smile bore a startling resemblance to Minato's. "Are you planning to visit that bookstore again?" Masaru, her husband, asked, pulling her out of her thoughts. A sharp retort was on the tip of her tongue, but Mitsuki held it back, reminding herself to set an example for her son about controlling one's tone. Instead, she inhaled deeply and focused on her son, who was sitting nearby. Masaru had always been understanding about her family and how Minato's disappearance had deeply affected her. It was only fair to give him a proper response. "She won't be there today," Mitsuki finally replied, her gaze briefly shifting to the window before returning to her husband. "Today is her last exam." Masaru blinked at her response, visibly curious, while Mitsuki slipped her hands into the pockets of her skirt. After today, Katsuki would have a break before leaving for the class trip planned by his school. Perhaps she should suggest that her son spend more time with his classmate and see if he could uncover the identity of her father. The thought gnawed at her. Could it really be a coincidence that Katsuki's classmate bore such a strong resemblance to her half-brother? If her suspicions were correct, it would mean that Minato had been alive long enough to father a child before his disappearance. The realization caused a lump to form in her throat, and she clenched her jaw in frustration. The idea that her brother could have lived, only to vanish without a trace, left her heart heavy with unanswered questions. Mitsuki tightened her jaw and exhaled deeply, her thoughts turbulent. The resentment she felt toward her late brother surfaced again, and she wondered bitterly if he were alive, she might have confronted him about his selfish choices. Life had never been the same for their family since their father took him away. The idea nagged at her. Could the girl really be connected to her family? Mitsuki knew there was only one way to confirm it, obtaining a strand of the girl's hair to compare it with her mother's DNA. "How do you know this?" her husband, Masaru, asked. His gaze held a mixture of concern and curiosity, emotions that Mitsuki usually found endearing. Today, however, they grated on her nerves. Must she explain everything to him? "She's Katsuki's classmate," Mitsuki admitted curtly, suppressing the urge to roll her eyes. Masaru blinked at her unusually straightforward answer, his expression betraying surprise. Mitsuki scowled. If her suspicions were correct, this couldn't stay a secret. Her mother deserved to know about a potential grandchild. The mere thought of her mother's reaction, visiting Minato's gravesite to vent her frustrations, made Mitsuki frown. It had been years since her brother's disappearance. Katsuki, their son, knew little about his classmate's background, let alone how long she had been an orphan. The knowledge gnawed at Mitsuki. If only Katsuki weren't so brash, she thought bitterly. He could have uncovered more information if he were better at handling people. She crossed her arms and sighed. Masaru's voice interrupted her musings. "Why have you been watching Katsuki's classmate?" His tone carried both concern and suspicion. Mitsuki stiffened. Did she forget to tell him the girl bore a striking resemblance to her half-brother? Judging by his disapproving stare, the answer was clear. "She looks like Minato," Mitsuki finally said, her tone clipped. Her red eyes shifted toward the students walking to school. She didn't need to see her husband's face to know he was worried. He always grew uneasy when the topic of her missing half-brother came up. Masaru's gaze flickered to the framed photo of Minato on the shelf, his habitual reaction to these conversations. Mitsuki's eyes, however, lingered on the photo of her mother beside it. Her mother had endured the greatest pain after Minato vanished during a seemingly ordinary walk in the park. Mitsuki closed her eyes briefly, recalling the day she had been questioned by police. The officer's indifference haunted her as much as the pleading look in her mother's eyes, urging her to recall every detail about the man who had approached Minato. 33 years had passed since that day, but the memories were vivid. Minato's biological father stood out, his golden hair unforgettable. All Might had a similar shade, and she still remembered Minato jokingly asking their mother if the hero was his father. Her mother had laughed it off, remarking she wished it were true. Mitsuki, it's been over 30 years, Masaru said gently, his voice tinged with sympathy. Whatever theory you have. It's impossible. Mitsuki's gaze returned to the photo of her brother. Impossible? She wasn't so sure. The girl's smile mirrored Minato's, and her golden hair was unmistakably similar. Could it all be a coincidence? We never found his body, she murmured. If Minato had truly died back then, they would have found some trace of him. This thought kept her mother hopeful all these years, and Mitsuki had always admired her strength. If anything ever happened to Katsuki, Mitsuki doubted she could show the same resilience. You need to let it go, Masaru said firmly. His tone startled her, and she turned to face him. His eyes, filled with pity and love, made her grind her teeth. Let it go? How could he suggest that so casually? You think I haven't tried? She snapped, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. The guilt weighed heavily on her heart. Memories of that fateful day, the last day she saw Minato, flooded her mind. The coldness of the winter air, her friend's warnings about the stranger, and her decision to dismiss it all. If I had stayed by his side. If I had listened, she whispered, her voice breaking. Maybe he'd still be here. Masaru wrapped his arms around her, his warmth offering a fleeting sense of comfort. Slowly, Mitsuki allowed herself to relax. She rarely let her guard down, especially not in front of Katsuki. But now, in her husband's embrace, the tears came freely. It wasn't your fault, Masaru murmured into her hair. But Mitsuki shook her head. I should have protected him, she said softly. The guilt remained, an ever-present shadow in her heart. With the normal subject exams finally over, Naruto could now turn her attention to a more pressing matter, Shoto. She absent-mindedly stirred her noodles, her blue eyes fixed on the blurry reflection in her bowl of miso ramen. The academic subjects had posed no significant challenge, and she was confident she had passed them all. Now, she needed to prepare for All Might's practical exam. If it involved robots, she was sure she'd manage. Overconfidence, perhaps, but she was a kunoichi, it was second nature to her. The sound of a chair being pulled back snapped her from her thoughts. Naruto glanced up to find Nehire settling into the seat across from her. Her friend's concerned gaze made it clear that her distraction hadn't gone unnoticed. Nehire didn't possess a quirk that allowed her to read minds, yet it was almost as if she could sense the turmoil within Naruto. What's on your mind, Naru-chan? I've never seen you this distracted, Nehire asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. Naruto sighed. It was impossible to deny how unfocused she had been, especially when she couldn't even finish her first bowl of ramen. She slumped her shoulders, her gaze dropping to the steaming bowl before her. Should she confide in Nehire about Shoto? Yet, she hesitated, knowing her friend might scold her for prioritizing this over their practical exam. Still, how could she focus on anything else when her mind replayed the moment Shoto confessed? His words echoed in her thoughts, accompanied by the intensity of his mismatched gaze and the frustration laced in his tone. It's obvious I like you. Naruto exhaled deeply. Perhaps it was time to share her thoughts. Shoto confessed to me, she admitted finally, her voice tinged with both disbelief and confusion. Nehire blinked before a knowing smile graced her lips. Did she already know? The memory of Nehire's comment during a shopping trip surfaced in Naruto's mind. I thought Todoroki-san would like to see you in a dress. That should have been the clue. Naruto resisted the urge to blame her friend for not being more direct. Nehire had likely considered this a matter best left between her and Shoto. She met Nehire's inquisitive gaze, feeling a mix of embarrassment and relief. You don't seem happy about it, Nehire observed, her brow furrowing. Do you not feel the same way? Naruto stared into her soup, her mind racing. The truth was simple, she did like Shoto. When had her feelings shifted from camaraderie to something deeper? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that her heart raced whenever their eyes met, and she found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. Even now, The memory of his confession stirred conflicting emotions within her. "I really like Shadow," she finally admitted, her cheeks flushed. Saying the words aloud felt juvenile but liberating, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her gaze drifted to Shadow, who was seated with Izuku and the others. His mismatched eyes were focused, his demeanor calm despite the lively discussion around him. A small smile tugged at her lips. He always paid attention to details she missed, a trait she found both frustrating and endearing. Still, his confession had thrown her off balance. Why hadn't he been more direct? She couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if things had escalated during that moment. Would he have kissed her? If so, how would it have felt, tentative or fervent? These thoughts made her throat dry, and she quickly sipped her drink. Nehire's giggle broke her reverie. "What's the issue then? You don't seem to have a problem flirting with him." Naruto's cheeks burned as her eyes flicked toward Shadow once more. His gaze lingered on her before he looked away, the tips of his ears reddening. The sight was undeniably adorable. She suppressed a grin, silently resolving to tease him just a little longer. If nothing else, she wanted to see if she could coax another confession from him, one made with full awareness this time. For now, though, she was content to savor the moment and the possibilities that lay ahead. "He confessed to me without even realizing it," Naruto explained, puffing out her cheeks. Nehire stared at her for a moment before glancing briefly at Shadow and then back at her. "Is it that hard to believe?" Naruto added, noticing the skeptical raise of Nehire's eyebrows. "He made me think all this time that he had feelings for someone else." A soft laugh escaped Nehire's lips, earning a raised eyebrow from Naruto. Did she not understand her frustration? Naruto's heart had ached and longed unnecessarily. She had held herself back for no reason, and now she felt like she had to recalibrate her emotions. She groaned, rubbing the back of her neck in frustration. "Naru-chan, I don't know Todoroki-san as well as you do, but I figured out he liked you without him even needing to say it," Nehire said with a small laugh. She paused, watching Naruto fidget with her chopsticks. "Todoroki-san doesn't seem like the type to easily vocalize his feelings, to anyone, let alone to you." Naruto sighed and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She stole a glance at Shadow, acknowledging his intelligence and charm. However, his emotional cluelessness was undeniable. Still, it was one of his endearing traits, paired with his tendency to be overly caring. He was improving, though, she noted. The way he spoke about her made her heart flutter. But that didn't mean she agreed with everything he had said. Pouting slightly, Naruto turned her attention back to Nehire, who had resumed eating her rice and chicken curry. "I know he means well, but the way he described me didn't sound like me at all," Naruto explained, her hand brushing her neck as she recalled the memory from the hospital. "He said I'm kind, that I have this bad habit of keeping things to myself, and that I act like I don't need anyone. How does that sound like me?" Nehire raised an eyebrow, seemingly unsure how to respond. Naruto frowned. There was nothing flattering in that description, or so she thought. Still, Shadow had called her perfect in his eyes. That alone stood out to her. No one had ever described her as perfect before. Most of the time, people pointed out what they wanted her to change. Sakura often urged her to be more sensitive or act more ladylike. But when Shadow had looked at her in that dress, his gaze made her feel like she was the center of the universe. Had anyone else ever made her feel that way? She didn't think so. "It sounds a lot like you," Nehire remarked thoughtfully. Her eyes darted to Shadow, studying him briefly before returning to her plate. "And I don't think Todoroki-san is fully capable of directly expressing how he feels. But the fact that he opened up as much as he did speaks volumes, doesn't it?" Naruto exhaled deeply. It did mean a lot. Shadow was known for bottling up his emotions until they reached a breaking point. That he trusted her enough to share even a fraction of his feelings was a significant step for him. It was sweet, though she wished he had been a bit clearer. She caught herself thinking, "I wouldn't have minded if he kissed me." Memories of their past kiss surfaced, but she knew self-control was important. She wasn't sure how Shadow felt about public displays of affection, But she could be quite touchy at times, something Sakura often scolded her for. He should have realized what he was saying when he told me he liked me, Naruto muttered, keeping her tone steady as her eyes drifted toward Shoto. If I hadn't noticed how unaware he was, I might have done something impulsive, like kiss him in the middle of the bookstore. Nehire coughed at the blunt statement, amusement dancing in her eyes. It wouldn't have been the first impulsive kiss, Naruto thought. But she didn't want to repeat her mistakes. Besides, they'd been in public that time. Naru-chan, confessing isn't as easy as it looks in the movies, Nehire said gently, pulling Naruto's focus back to her. Her friend's soft blue eyes reminded her of the time Nehire had struggled to express her feelings to a Majiki. For someone as reserved as Todoroki-san, it's even harder. He was probably scared you'd reject him. Why would I reject him? Naruto thought, her heart softening at the idea. Shoto was one of the best things that had happened to her. Still, she understood why he might have been hesitant. After all, when she'd kissed him impulsively in the past, she had dismissed it as a spur-of-the-moment action. That might have given him the impression she wasn't serious about him. There's also the fact that he doesn't know how you feel, Nehire continued. Naruto slouched in her seat, watching her friend balance her chopsticks on her lips. Maybe start complimenting him more and flirt like you used to, just a little more discreetly this time. Naruto groaned, burying her face in her hands as Nehire laughed softly. What did you discuss with Hadu? Naruto tore her gaze away from the teachers, who were gathered in a circle, and focused on Shoto. Her friend gazed back at her, his mismatched eyes filled with curiosity, causing a smile to form on her lips. If not for Nehire's advice, she might have opted to avoid the topic altogether. However, she recognized an opportunity in his evident interest in her conversation with Nehire. As a kunoichi, Naruto had always told Hinata that when you like someone, you playfully flirt and tease them. She linked their arms together, drawing him closer. Her lips curled into a small, innocent smile as Shoto's eyes briefly flicked down before returning to her face. He made no move to remove his arm from hers. It's a secret, homeostasis, she replied, keeping her voice steady even though her heart raced at the subtle physical contact. She met his gaze with a calm expression. You'll have to offer me something in return if you want to know. A date would be nice, maybe even a kiss, but Naruto wasn't in a rush to say that outright. She wanted him to figure it out on his own. Her smile widened when she noticed his eyes darken, realizing that his reaction could be dangerous if others noticed. She considered pulling back, but her curiosity about what he would offer lingered. Would he have the courage to ask her on a quiet dinner date? Or perhaps a movie? She doubted it. Shoto was often quite oblivious to these things. She wasn't sure what he might offer, but she expected it to be something that wouldn't allow him to reveal his intentions too easily. I'll buy you ramen, he finally said. The offer was tempting. Her mouth watered at the thought of ramen, but she had to admit it wasn't quite enough to sway her. She wiped a bit of saliva from the corner of her lips and met his gaze again, her eyes twinkling with playful amusement. If she didn't know about his feelings, this would have sufficed, but it was clear that Shoto was not exactly forthright about his intentions. An idea formed in her mind. She remembered that Kenji had told her she could use his dojo anytime, which gave her the perfect opportunity to steer this moment in a new direction. Naruto leaned in just enough to whisper into his ear, close enough to feel his musky cologne. Not quite a good enough offer, homeostasis, she murmured, her voice soft. She inhaled his scent once more, a subtle smile curling on her lips as she pulled back to meet his eyes. You'll have to offer me something better if you want to hear about my conversation with Nehire. Shoto's brows furrowed as he focused intently on her, trying to figure out what might be a more appealing offer. The idea of a date in a quiet place came to her mind, something away from the crowd where they could truly connect. Her fingers gently tapped her lips in thought, wondering what Shoto would come up with. Would he catch on to the double meaning behind her words? She glanced briefly at Ashido and Kaminari, who were happily discussing their summer plans, before her gaze shifted to Bakugo. He wasn't glaring at her specifically, but rather at her arm linked with Shoto's. What was his problem? She wasn't doing anything wrong. Their conversation was completely innocent. "What do you want, Naruto?" Shouto's voice brought her back to the present. His eyes flickered between her eyes and lips. Naruto smiled wider, pretending to ponder his question. She knew she needed to push him further to make his intentions clear. "I want to have a good old-fashioned spar," she replied brightly. Shouto blinked, clearly taken aback by her response. "You asked me to train you in hand-to-hand combat, remember?" She continued with a playful tilt of her head. She wasn't giving him any hints, she wanted to see if he would figure it out on his own. Shouto blinked again, seemingly puzzled. "We aren't having the spar at my house," he said, his gaze lingering on her hair as he tucked a loose strand behind her ear. She shivered at the sensation, not from his touch, but from the coldness that emanated from his hand, leaving a strange, lingering warmth behind. "Who says anything about homes?" Naruto responded smoothly. "We'll use my uncle's dojo on Sunday." Shouto blinked again, a slight understanding dawning in his eyes. This might be the closest thing to a proper date, he thought to himself. Naruto smiled at the thought. It was a little sly, but she figured since he had been the first to recognize his feelings, it was only fair to give him a chance to take the lead. If he managed to stay focused during their sparring session, she would take charge afterward. "I'm still buying you ramen after we finish the exam," Shouto added. Naruto turned to face him, a teasing grin on her face. His eyes dared her to argue against his offer, and she laughed softly. "Just the two of us?" she asked, her voice light and inviting. The boy nodded, and the blonde embraced him. His mismatched eyes remained calm as he made no immediate reaction to the contact. Naruto shivered slightly when her hand gently patted his back. This moment was surprisingly comfortable. Perhaps she shouldn't have hugged him, but it conveyed a message: he wasn't as oblivious as others might think. It meant she would have his full attention, and for now, that was enough. After a brief moment, she released him and turned her focus toward the gates. With their plans for the week in place, it was time to shift her focus to the upcoming exams. There was a growing sense of unease as their teachers continued to stay present, and a suspicion that the exams wouldn't be as simple as Itsuka had suggested. "Why are the other teachers still here?" she wondered aloud. "The practical exam is about to begin," Aizawa said, his gaze narrowing as he scanned the students. His eyes lingered slightly on her, as though silently urging her to stay focused. Raising an eyebrow, she glanced at Shouto. Had he noticed their brief exchange? His looks suggested he had. Naruto flushed slightly at the thought, straightened her posture, and clicked her heels together. She saluted Aizawa, though her teacher only snorted and shook his head, his expression unchanged. She knew there was no satisfying him, but at least she was showing improvement since the start of the semester. Aizawa's voice cut through the air. "Remember, you can still fail this test. If you want to head to the Forest Lodge, you better not make any mistakes." He turned his gaze toward her as he continued, "I trust you've learned everything you could from your seniors or classmates, so you should have a good idea of what's expected of you. Just like the entrance exams, right?" someone murmured. "Actually, the exams will be different this time," Aizawa said, as Principal Nezu suddenly popped out from beneath Aizawa's binding cloth. Naruto blinked, confused at the sight of the humanoid animal as Nezu made his way down to the floor. "Due to various reasons, the contents of the test are changing," Nezu announced, his eyes scanning the students. "From this point onward, we'll emphasize more on person-on-person battle activities, with a focus on simulating a real combat environment." There was a collective silence as the students absorbed the new information. "We'll be pairing you up," Nezu continued, gesturing toward the teachers. "You will fight one of the teachers." "Against the teachers?" Uraka asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Your pairings have already been decided," Aizawa explained. "We've taken your movement patterns, grades, and familiarity into account when making these decisions." Naruto exchanged a glance with Shouto, noticing his furrowed brow. She frowned, calculating the number of students in the class. If they were working in pairs, there might be one trio. Who would be placed in the third spot? She had often been grouped with Yaoyorozu and Mineta, but for once, she hoped to be paired with just one other person. For now, Aizawa continued, Todoroki is paired with Yaoyorozu. Your task is to try to take me down. Naruto quickly looked at Shoto, who seemed deep in thought. Yaoyorozu was also focused, clearly planning her next move. The real question for Naruto, however, was whether they could communicate effectively during the fight. Midoriya, Aizawa said, and Naruto turned her attention to him. You'll be paired with Bakugo and Uzumaki. The three students stiffened. Midoriya began to sweat nervously, while Bakugo scowled. Naruto gave a tight-lipped smile, her fists clenched in anticipation. Why the three of us? Naruto muttered under her breath, just loud enough for the others to hear. Though they had managed to get along recently, tension still lingered with Bakugo ever since Naruto revealed her background as a kunoichi. Could Aizawa sense the underlying strain between them? With Bakugo glaring at both her and Midoriya, she doubted Aizawa believed everything was fine. Your opponent, Aizawa continued, snapping her from her thoughts. Suddenly, the ground rumbled, and a loud, boisterous laugh filled the air. A familiar hulking figure landed before them, causing Naruto to wince at the volume of his laughter. You'll be facing me. All Might declared, raising his fist triumphantly. The three of you will need to work together to defeat me. Bring everything you've got. Naruto's only thought was that it would take a miracle for all three of them to truly cooperate. Hey there, my wonderful YouTube family. That's all for today's video. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feedback, and any suggestions you have, so don't hesitate to drop them in the comments below. Sending you all my love, and I appreciate every one of you. Take care, and until next time. Anime Dreams.